Hello all my chess friends! In today's video you are going to witness the most thorough yet concise analysis that you will find anywhere of one of Magnus Carlsen's most masterful performances of the past week, where he defeats Jan-Krzysztof Duda in a rapid game from the finals of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour using a rather unorthodox variation of the modern defense. Did he prepare this line with a computer, or does he just think like a computer? I don't know. Whatever the case, Duda, despite struggling hard to prove an advantage, ultimately crumbled under the relentless pressure of the Magnus. So without further delay, here is their epic struggle. Enjoy. Duda begins with c4, the English opening. We got g6 from Carlsen, known as the Great Snake variation, which transposes into a modern defense with d4. Now here a lot of players would go knight to f6 to prevent white from getting the big center with e4, but Carlsen allows it. Bishop g7. Duda takes the opportunity to establish this beautiful pawn trio in the center, but Carlsen is going to try to undermine the center, and he already starts working towards that goal with the move d6, preparing c5, which will strike at d4. This also opens a diagonal for his light square bishop. Duda plays knight to c3, we get c5. Now here a beginner might think it's good to take on c5, because once the pawn recaptures, the queen can take the queen, depriving black the right to castle. But black does not have to capture the pawn right away. The best move here is bishop takes c3 first with check, and after b takes c3, now d takes c5, queen takes, king takes, and while black can't castle, the queens are off the board, which means the black king is relatively safe. And look at this bad pawn structure that white has been given. That's why you don't want to go for d takes c5. Duda played the better move, d5, preserving his pawn trio, although it's less mobile now. Now here Carlsen plays a move that traditionally has not been very popular among humans, but the computer loves it. Stockfish agrees that his move, bishop takes c3 check, is a good move. So this could be the indication of some computer prep on the part of Magnus Carlsen. That's what I would suspect, although it is entirely possible that he just came up with this move on his own, which goes against traditional wisdom, which says that after b takes c3, these weak dark squares around black's king side are nothing to be proud of. So why did Carlsen do this? Well, his plan is e5, taking more central control. This move would not be good if the bishop was still sitting on g7, because it would block its activity. That would just be kind of a bad piece. But since he's traded the bishop off, this is a strong move for black, and look at the white pawn structure. It's pretty immobilized. A big pawn center is a lot stronger if you can do something with it. But now white has no central pawn moves. Not really any pawn breaks, except possibly f4, as we'll see later. Duda develops his bishop with bishop to d3. If you're wondering about d takes e6, this does give black a backward pawn. Bishop takes e6 is black's best response. But this isn't great for white. Trying to win this pawn will just get him into trouble. And you notice that pawn's being targeted by the bishop, and he's got all these weak pawns over here. So for example, if you try bishop f4, just go after that pawn, black can just develop and even let you take the pawn, because look at queen a5 is coming. Hitting this pawn here, you got the ideas of rook d8, trapping the white queen. Black is the preferred side here. So that's not a good road to go down as white. Bishop d3, played in the game, and now knight to d7. I think a lot of lesser players would have played knight to f6 instead. It's very natural looking. However, it surrenders some control of the dark squares. This knight f6 move would block the queen on this diagonal, so bishop g5 could pin that knight. It would also allow bishop h6 in some lines, since this knight is no longer watching over that square. So it's a very accurate play by Carlsen to put the knight on d7. Good developing move, and a little bit of a waiting move to see what white's going to do. Duda now plays a move which the computer says is inaccurate, f4. There is some logic to it, because he wants to play knight f3, which would block the f-pawn. So he's trying to get that move in to challenge the center before knight f3. The computer says something like rook to b1 would have been better, or even the idea of bishop c2 and then possibly going to a4, possibly trading off that bad bishop hemmed in by its own pawns at some point. But f4 is not good, because after e takes f4, bishop takes f4, white's getting some activity. After he castles, he's going to have this open f-file to work with, but he does have this backward weak e-pawn that black can play against now. Carlsen plays a very accurate move here. Queen to h4 check. He wants to develop the queen to e7, but he's going to play this move first. Okay, so there's a check, and there's a threat to win the bishop. So white has two possible defenses. You can play g3 and weaken your king side a little bit. Duda doesn't like that, so he plays bishop g3. Now the queen goes to e7. So the only difference between playing the queen to e7 right away and throwing in this queen to h4 check first is that you've induced the move bishop to g3 by white. So why is the bishop worse on g3 than on f4? We're going to see very soon. Knight to f3 by Duda here, and now we see the point of that queen to h4 check. Knight to h6. This would not be possible if the bishop was still on f4. This is actually a better way to develop the knight than going to f6. Because on f6, again, there would be the possibility of a pin with the bishop, which could be uncomfortable. Also, on f6, the knight would block the move f6, which is what Carlsen wants to play, locking down this e-pawn, making it virtually impossible to advance it. It'd be a permanent weakness for white. So very accurate play by Carlsen. Now, I don't know how much of this was preparation, but he's playing a lot of computer moves, that much I know. Now you might say this knight looks pretty bad here on h6. It's true, it's on the rim of the board, which isn't known to be the best place for a knight, but it can jump to g4 and then to that beautiful e5 square. If white were to prevent that with h3, after the move f6, you can get to e5 via f7. So that's not a permanent home for that knight. So here Duda, knowing what's coming, the move f6, locking down that pawn, decides he's going to go ahead and just force the issue with e5. He says, you know what, I'm going to play it while I have the chance and get rid of my weak backward pawn without getting a pawn in return. The computer doesn't like this. This is a pawn sacrifice, but it's not really worth it. Better here would have been just castling, allowing this f6 idea. You know, the knight can go to f7, and you're not ever advancing this pawn, but the engine says you can play rook f2, you can double your rooks, and this pawn here is a little bit weak. It says the position's roughly equal. Black doesn't really have a way to win this pawn, and white can get some counterplay on this file. So that would have been the best way for white to go. And instead we have Duda forcing the issue with e5. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, d takes e5. So we have this imbalanced position where black is a pawn up. White has a nice passed pawn now. Black has a passed pawn. White has the bishop pair. Knight's still on the rim. So white's development's looking a little bit better. But white does have the damaged pawn structure, and the computer engine thinks that black is a full pawn up here. So not really any compensation for white, unfortunately, for Duda, who castles at this point. Carlsen castles. We got queen d2 with an attack on the knight. This would be unpleasant for black, if not for this beautiful f5 square that's available. Hitting this bishop here, Duda decides to give up his bad bishop on the same color complex as these pawns. He says, okay, I'll give up the bishop pair. After bishop takes f5, I'm going to play rook f2. I'm going to double my rooks. I've still got my dark squared bishop. You've got weak dark squares around your king. I'm hoping this compensates me for the lost pawn. Here Carlsen plays f6. It's a good move. It adds defense to e5, and it clears the way for rook to f7. Duda doubles his rooks. Carlsen doesn't play rook to f7 here, though. This is the best move because white has a threat of bishop to h4. And here you can double the rooks, and now the f-pawn has adequate protection. So you can get this bishop out of the way, and then you can play g5. This will kick the bishop off h4, and now there's less pressure on f6. Apparently that's black's most vulnerable point. Let's contrast that with what Carlsen did. Rook a to d8. Duda plays queen to e3 here, putting some pressure on c5, although it's defended by the queen. But he should have taken the opportunity to play this bishop h4 move. Now let's see how this is different since Carlsen hasn't begun to double his rooks. The threat now is to play g4, kick that bishop, and then there's three pieces hitting f6. So Carlsen would need to defend the pawn further with rook to d6. Now we go like this. The bishop gets out of the way since g4 is coming. Bishop c8, but now there's this move, bishop g5. This pawn's pinned. You take the bishop, you're going to have a problem here. It's pinned two ways. You can't take the bishop, you can't move it because you're losing your queen, and there's not an easy way to alleviate the pressure on f6. So that would have been best for Duda. But instead he played queen to e3. Carlsen just adds some defense to b6. This wasn't really necessary. The engine said moving the bishop back so that this could be met with this is better, and there wouldn't be any rook takes bishop. Now Duda finds bishop to h4. Carlsen plays rook to d6. He realizes that pawn needs more protection because there's the threat of g4, and then the bishop moves, and then the pawn's captured on f6. That isn't favorable for black. Duda goes h3, getting ready to kick the bishop. Carlsen puts his bishop to d7. The computer says bishop c8 is better because now that b6 has been played, you can play bishop a6 and target c4 potentially. That is perhaps white's weakest pawn. At this point, Duda plays rook to f3. It improves the position of the rook a little bit, I guess, but it doesn't do enough. The computer says bishop g5 is better, or even g4, locking down the f pawn. Here Carlsen plays rook to f7. He's planning bishop to e8, after which this rook will have adequate protection so that g5 can be played. That move can't be played right away, of course, because the bishop will take the pawn, and then the pawn takes, and then the rook takes. So that's his plan. I guess he wants to leave the rook on d6 to blockade this pawn. But again, the computer says bishop c8 was better, planning to go to a6. g4 from Duda, good move now. And at this point, the computer says the position is close to equal. Carlsen has not played this ideally, but the game is far from over. We got bishop to e8, planning on kicking this bishop away by playing g5. There's not going to be any bishop takes g5, relieving the pressure on f6. Again, bishop c8 was better. Now Duda gets a little too ambitious again. He's really going all out for the win. You got to hand it to him. He knows g5's coming, but allowing that would have been his best chance. The computer says just play bishop g3. Don't worry about g5. The position is roughly equal. Despite white being a pawn down, he's got good control of the position with his rooks, queen. His pieces are positioned pretty nicely, and black is going to have a hard time making progress here. But I guess Duda's still trying to prove that his pawn sacrifice was sound, and he plays his g5 move. And Carlsen says, hey, I will jump at the chance to bypass your pawn, play f5, and now look who has two connected passed pawns. But Duda was counting on this move rook to e1, attacking this pawn with two pieces, after which the only defense for Carlsen is to just move the pawn forward with e4. Duda plays bishop to g3, hitting the rook. The rook simply moves. Obviously, this pawn here is in a bit of a pin. You can grab the rook, but then queen takes, rook takes, rook takes. White is winning in this position, having infiltrated with the rook. This pawn will be lost, so you don't want to do that. Rook d8 is the better move. Here Duda moves the rook out of danger, even though there wasn't a threat to capture the rook yet. He's just being overly cautious. He figures he'll probably have to move that rook eventually. The computer doesn't like this move. It says, don't make defensive moves unless you have to. Instead of moving that rook back, you should have played something like h4. So let's look at this position now. It looks pretty good for black with these two advanced passed pawns, but they have been lured onto the same color complex as the light squared bishop, which is going to make it easier for white to blockade them. You got firm control of f4. This pawn's not going forward. The bishop can't help it go forward. It can't control these dark squares. So Duda was apparently counting on this position being good for him. He says, I'm going to blockade your passed pawns, and maybe he's still playing for a win here. But the engine says he's lost. Now let's see how Carlsen punishes Duda for allowing him to get these two connected passed pawns. He plays a good move, bishop to d7. The bishop's more active. It may finally go to c8, a6, and target c4. Duda says, you know what, that's okay. I'm going to run rampant on these dark squares. You don't have a dark squared bishop anymore, so I'm going to try to blockade while infiltrating. Rook e8, since the rook was hit. Now here the engine says just play bishop to f4 and try to hold the fort down. But Duda is in aggressive mode. Queen to f4. We got bishop to c8, eyeing the a6 square, opening up an attack on the bishop, so it can't stay there. Bishop d6 by Duda, hitting the queen. Queen goes to d8. Now Duda plays bishop to e5. This carries a threat. If it were white to move in this position, what would you play as white? The threat behind this move is rook takes e4. Obviously, you cannot take that rook, or you're getting checkmated with queen takes f7, checkmate. But Carlsen has a really nice way to deal with this threat. He just takes out the bishop, sacks the exchange for this pawn here on g5. Queen takes g5 check. Now, if you count the value of the material, it is now equalized. Black has two pawns for the sacrificed exchange, but the white king's looking a little insecure. And there's these two connected passed pawns. Does white have enough compensation with his passed pawn? We will see. Duda plays rook g2, attacking the queen. Queen goes to f6, inviting a queen trade. Duda declines. Queen to b8, attacking the bishop, which is pinned to the king. Rook f8 defends. We don't want any kind of discovered attack with that bishop, so the queen gets out of there. Queen to f4, Here Carlsen plays bishop to a6. Very natural looking move. Not easy to defend that pawn while maintaining your blockade. Queen to f1. Now this pawn's free to start moving forward at some point. But Duda actually has this miraculous defense that the computer found. It says he might just survive with the move h4, which is what he played, but he didn't follow up correctly. Bishop takes c4, that's what's played in the game. Duda advances his passed pawn, which is not good, it's just totally losing. But it's a very human thing to do, you know, the pawn was threatened to be taken by the bishop. But this amazing computer defense, h5, may not have saved his game, but it definitely would have made black's job a lot harder. The point is, you just give up all these pawns here, but you get to take on g6, h takes g6, and with this open h-file and these rooks, there just may be enough counterplay to survive. The engine still thinks it's about a pawn in black's favor here, but that apparently was the best defense. So let's look at why queen takes c3 back here would have been a better move for Carlsen than this bishop a6. After queen takes c3, first of all, it comes with an attack on the rook, so the rook has to move. Then you can take the pawn on c4. Now if white tries the same thing, you're gobbling these pawns with the queen instead of the bishop. The queen before was on f6, but now that square is cleared, so when white plays h5, this is just one line that works for black. Rook to f6. Now if you take here, rook takes g6, you don't have that open h-file. A pair of rooks are going to get traded, and white doesn't really have the attacking forces anymore, and is just lost. So that's hard stuff to see, especially in a rapid game. Bishop to a6, and then we get h4, and then after it takes here, we got d6 by Duda, thinking his passed pawn is his best hope. Now Carlsen grabs on c3. Again, with an attack on the rook, we got rook to e3, hitting the queen, queen to d4. Pinning the rook. h5 by Duda, desperately trying to get an attack going, but it's a little late. Bishop to f7 by Carlsen, adding defense to g6. King h2, unpinning this rook so that it can hopefully do something. But now rook d8. Carlsen looks to round up this passed pawn. Rook e to g3, adding more of an attack to g6. We got queen takes d6. Duda does get to grab a pawn here. Queen takes f5. This pawn is pinned. And we got rook to e8, getting behind his farthest advanced passed pawn. Duda takes on g6. H takes g6. This rook is pinned again by the queen. So king to h1 unpins this rook so that now rook takes g6 is the threat. After bishop takes, we'd have the other rook taking on g6 with check, hitting the black queen. Of course, Carlsen doesn't want to allow that. So he plays king to g7, adding more defense to g6. Duda plays rook to h3, hoping for some activity along this open file, but it's a little late. Queen to e6, attacking the queen, also attacking the rook through the queen. Duda, of course, does not want to trade queens since he's down in material and he's hoping for some kind of an attack, so he plays queen to h5. Again, there's no pawn takes queen. This pawn's pinned to the king by the rook, and this is looking kind of scary. Queen's coming in here. Maybe there's hope for white here. Here, Carlsen found the simplest solution. What would you play as black here? Carlsen just clarifies the situation with queen takes h3 check. And after queen takes h3, rook to h8. Getting the queen back since she's pinned to the king. Duda takes the rook, king takes, and now that the smoke is cleared, we can see black has 4 pawns for the exchange. Materially speaking, white is completely lost, but it's not time to throw in the towel yet. Duda struggles on, puts the rook on an open file. We get bishop c4, rook goes to d7, targeting a pawn there. But of course, giving up the pawn on a2. Bishop takes a2, rook takes a7. Now we got bishop c4. Duda knows he needs to move his king towards the center. Bishop d3 by Carlsen, getting ready to start marching that pawn forward. Rook to c7, Duda gets his rook behind it. We got c4, rook b7. He knows he's got to take out some pawns. This, of course, allows this pawn to start getting dangerously close to promotion square. But he sees that after he takes the pawn in c2, he can play rook c6 and stop it just in time. Unfortunately, this rook is now tied down to babysitting. It cannot leave this file, or else there's going to be a new queen. And here comes e3. He throws in a check. King goes to g7. Now, Duda needs to get his king involved. g5 played, king to f3. Carlsen goes ahead with e2. This forces king to f2. Can't allow that. And now here comes the g-pawn. This king now has double duty. has the responsibility of stopping both this pawn and this pawn. Not possible. But Duda gives it his best try. He goes king to e1, and after g3, he says, I'm going to try to survive by sacking the rook for 2 pawns. Bishop takes c2, king takes e2. Can this pawn be stopped by the king? You cannot checkmate with only a bishop and a king, so if Duda can round up that last pawn, he will survive. But Carlsen finds a beautiful finish here. He finds the move, bishop to d1 check. Simplest way to end the game. Here Duda resigns. If you take the bishop, of course, g2, and the pawn is unstoppable. If you put the king to f1, bishop to f3, and this king is in jail. The black king's just going to come up and then aid in the promotion of this pawn. And this king can't really go anywhere. All these squares are covered. The king cannot move to any of those squares. Can't move to that square either. So the only way out is to go here. But if you get to this square, now you can't stop the pawn from becoming a queen. So it's just completely hopeless. So a very nice finish by Carlsen.